All right. Well, hey, well, thanks for everybody for joining us. We're going to kind of get going here because I know a lot of people try to catch this on their lunch hour. I am super excited to bring in Dr. Adam Rinde. Adam and I have worked together, I guess, on and off since like 2006, 2005-ish. He brought to my attention even before we started that he did one of our first lectures at Redmond PT, which was my first clinic, and that was on vitamin D. And that was at the time, vitamin D, I think you would be a better judge of this than me, but it was kind of in the same trajectory of the microbiome. It was like the new thing that everyone was talking about, and it was making its way into personal trainers talking about it, and chiropractors and PTs. And so I think the microbiome there being mentioned on so many podcasts, both those that are related to healthcare and those that are actually just related to fitness and sport, is kind of an interesting thing. And what's really led me to because I had so many patients ask me questions about the microbiome, and I basically knew what Wikipedia knows because that's what I've been reading. I was like, well, we should probably bring in, at least in my mind, kind of the local expert on this, and that's Dr. Rinde. And again, he's been practicing for a long time now. We're both much more gray, as we were talking about prior to the show. But he's a graduate of Bastyr University in naturopathic medicine. He did a family medicine residency at Bastyr, but has treated thousands of patients in the area. And I think it's kind of a go-to. I know when I have young naturopaths that are graduating that want to know who to talk to, I usually send them to Dr. Rinde and Dr. LeCoven, are two excellent providers that are in such close proximity to us. But in full transparency, Dr. Rinde was the first naturopath for myself that I've ever worked with. And I think it's a real huge complement to care. And I think it really is a really good cohesiveness with physical therapy, and the fact that pharmaceuticals and things is kind of not a therapist's first choice. So I think not to pigeonhole all naturopaths not being in for medicinal situations, but I think like PTs and naturopaths are a really natural combination of care and a good team. Dr. Rende's got a great team at his office as well, Diana and Randy, who if you have questions, they can kind of forward on Dr. Rende's information to you too. We'll have a couple questions at the end. I want to kind of just quick housekeeping note is to make sure people, if you have a question, give me a little Q&A, which should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit a question at the end. We'll kind of do some questions there too. And I want to kind of keep it a little bit interactive, but at the same time, let you get through your lecture. And there should be some really good information here too. So without further ado, I'll let you take it from here. But thanks again for coming in. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, Ben. It's really great to be here. And thank you to all of you who are attending the webinar today. I know that you all have busy schedules, and taking some time out to share this time with us, I really appreciate it. And I do also want to just give some compliments to the staff at Lake Washington Physical Therapy. It's my go-to for referring patients for physical therapy. I always can trust that the patients are going to get good care. And I really appreciate what you've created, Ben, with your team.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, so we'll get into today's lecture. The microbiome is a big topic to cover in 30 minutes. We're going to be zooming in even further onto the gut microbiome. And that alone is probably, to give it proper respect, would be, like a weekend conference. But I'm going to really pull out some highlights for you to maybe walk away with some further understanding and clarity about what this is all about. When I Google microbiome and put in basically anything connected to it, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of hits that come up. And so it's being talked about a lot. And I think, to be able to use this information will require some clarity on some of the key concepts. So what we're going to do is go through some background information. I'm going to also share with you key concepts in the microbiome so you can understand the language. And we'll talk about how the microbiome relates to your own health. I'm going to also zoom in a little bit to the population that I think, and people who are probably attending this webinar, which is people who are involved in recovery, sports performance, or recovering from an injury. I'm going to talk a little bit more granular details about that. And then we're going to leave with some kind of action steps you can take for your microbiome. So we'll get started with the first slide. I think Ben did a great job introducing my practice and who I am. I appreciate that. A few other highlights that I just want to mention is I have a podcast that I do that comes out every couple of weeks. So if you like this kind of information, you can look that up. It's listed there. Also, I'm involved with nonprofit work. I run a pediatric cancer nonprofit in my spare time called Blankets for Cancer. I always like to talk about that because it's a passion of mine. I just want to acknowledge a lot of people who have shaped my understanding of the microbiome. This is just a list of really amazingly knowledgeable clinicians and researchers that have really helped me understand this arena, and I want to thank all of them. This list is not inclusive of all the people that have helped me understand the gut microbiome, but I just wanted to give a quick shout out. So I'm going to pause here and really zoom in on this picture here, because this really shapes my philosophy of what we need to think about when we're talking about digestive health or gut health. This is a wonderful picture by Nick Spencer of a gardening project that's involving what looks to be like the descending colon. And you know, this really is how I think about gut health, is that we are really gardening an ecosystem when we're talking about balancing all the different activities and functions and properties of the digestive tract. It's a lot like gardening. There's a soil, there's species, there's a pH to manage, there's management of nutrition. And when you think about it this way, it's not a whole lot different than gardening. And when you see imbalances in a garden, you figure that out and you figure out how to make the ecosystem more healthy. And that's really how I think about gut health. So why do we care about this topic? So this is a diagram of some of the more common links of gut health to disease, and specifically the microbiome and its link to disease. So if we pay attention to the research, the microbiome has been linked to metabolic disorders like type 2 diabetes. It's been linked to brain disorders such as Parkinson's disease. Of course, digestive health, everybody can make that connection. Ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease have a microbiome link, IBS, colorectal cancer. But it expands even further into inflammatory disorders like rheumatoid arthritis and autoimmune conditions, and even skin disorders like acne, psoriasis, and eczema. So what we know is that the microbiota can be, and imbalances in the microbiome can be drivers and contributors to these health conditions. A lot of the interest in the microbiome has developed specifically because we're learning that more and more drugs, such as antibiotics, are having resistance problems. And so we need to think about not necessarily killing bacteria, but how to work with them and how to have an understanding of how to develop the physiology and the immunology around the microbiota so that we have other options in treatments. So when we're talking about athletic performance and recovery and physical therapy in this world, one of the things that's really clear in the literature is the influence that gut health, specifically the gut lining and gut permeability issues, have to do with recovery. So this diagram really talks about how in the athlete or in someone who's an exerciser that does not have a healthy balance of microbes and has maybe intestinal permeability issues, which we'll go into later, they may be exposing their body to more inflammation. This inflammation can become a problem when it's not regulated. Inflammation is good for our health when it's regulated. When it becomes unregulated, then we see sort of an expression of these molecules. One of them that's really popular to know about is NF-kappa beta. And so this can cause problems with muscle repair, lasting inflammation and swelling after exercise, decreased mitochondrial function, which leads to kind of post-exercise fatigue. The big one is DOMS, which is delayed onset muscle soreness. And so when we're thinking about these conditions, sure, we can pop an Advil and move on or rest, but for people who are really struggling with maintaining exercise because of pain, fatigue, exertional problems, they can really be thinking, maybe there's something I can do for my gut health that can potentially balance the amount of inflammation I have from exercise. So we see that people who over-exercise and have undernutrition are really exposed to this problem. So these are people who are really pushing the throttle with their exercise, but they're not eating a balanced diet. There can be a weakness of their microbiome and providing protective species and protective barrier function. And so that's a real vulnerable population. Also, people who use a lot of anti-inflammatories, such as NSAIDs, who are using those excessively, may have problems with this issue. We'll get into this further. There's been lots of debates about high protein, low carb diets and their impact on the gut lining. The research goes back and forth as to whether it's helpful or not. I'm not going to make any conclusive statements on that. I just think it's really important, as you'll find out by the time we get through this, about how to nourish your microbiome and how to nourish your intestinal lining so that this isn't set up. So some basic definitions on the microbiome is that we have kind of these two camps. I think most people are familiar with the human genome, which was obviously a big scientific discovery of understanding, identifying all the genes in the human body. And then the human microbiome, which is the collection of microbes and their genes inhabiting various regions of the human body. So there's a microbiome in the lungs that is different than the microbiome in the gut. They're studying microbiomes in the eyes, in the vaginal tract, in the bladder. There's various subsets of colonies or basically a fingerprint of a microbiome that lives in various regions of our body. So when we're talking about the human microbiome, we're talking about the whole collection of bugs and microbes that are living in our body and in different regions. There's even a study now of looking at the human microbiome in breast tissue and its links to breast cancer. There's a study of testing the microbiome in the mother's milk to see what's being transferred to children and infants who are feeding. So this is, when I'm talking about the microbiome, it's that whole, encompasses the whole body. So the microbiome is a lot different than the human genome because it is more individualized. So the differences between two humans is very little, but the differences between two human microbiomes is drastically different. So we can't find two people who have the same microbiome. And that gives you a sense of all the different factors. We see different microbiomes based on the part of the world you live in, obviously based on your lifestyle, and the human microbiome is highly modifiable, where the human genome is, as far as changing it on a day-to-day basis, is very difficult to do.
Until we get instant CRISPR, right?
Yes, yes.
That's next lecture.
Yes. So we don't actually know a whole lot about the microbiome. And I just want to point this out because whenever you see something come out on the human microbiome, you want to realize that this is a big area of learning. And it's estimated that we only know about 50% of what we need to know to really understand how to work with the human microbiome. And I'll highlight why in just a moment. And this just reminds me of medicine in general. So this is just kind of something I picked up at a conference once that I find funny, and I'm responsible for maybe 10% of this screen. I added this last click, which is, I think I can do it. I think yes, there's my joke. So we have basically, a system of medicine that's constantly evolving. And whenever you hear something, it's important to have a little bit of skepticism about, is this ready for prime time? And that's certainly the case for the study of the gut microbiome. Is we're learning as we go. There are people who are ill that need this information, but it's certainly not a perfect science yet. Just like many things in medicine, we could see this turning in a different direction real soon. On a daily basis, we learn things that weren't correct that were previously thought as correct. If you're really interested in this topic, I can encourage you to look up the work of Tim Spector and Jeff Leach, who did a lot of study on the microbiomes in hunter-gatherer populations in Tanzania. And this tree on the right is the baobab tree, and a lot of the Hadza tribe will consume various parts of this tree. Their fiber content in their diet compared to the fiber content of the American population is dramatically different. So the average American eats about 12 to 15 grams of fiber a day. And in the Hadza tribe population in Tanzania, it's upwards to 100 to 125 grams a day. And their microbiome seems to be associated with very little chronic disease. So they became a big epidemiologic group that has been studied. And I encourage you to look up that work for some really interesting, fascinating information. So what is the microbiota specifically? Well, this slide depicts 4 of the 5 categories that of microbes that are considered in the microbiome. We have bacteria, obviously, which is the group that we know the most about. Fungal microbiota, which is called the mycobiome, which we know very little about. The viral microbiota, which is actually the most abundant of the microbe categories, which we really don't know a whole lot about what they're doing. We know that they have a function that's called a bacteriophage function. Helminths, which are worms, and yes, worms do live in our body, some in a normal capacity, causing no disease. And we don't know much about them as well. And then the 5th group that's not depicted here is archaea, which is a methane-producing organism. This is actually one of the oldest forms of life that's known, is also a population in our microbiome. And we actually are starting to learn quite a bit about archaea. So to meet your gut microbiome, just a couple things to know is that the intestinal tract is about 30 feet long. And the small intestine is most of that. The large intestine is about 4 to 5 feet, and the small intestine being the rest. If you stretched out the small intestine, it would be the size of a tennis court. So that's where most of the action happens in our digestive tract, is mainly the absorption of nutrients that we use for our body take place in the small intestine. Most of the nutrition for the microbes takes place in the colon. The colon is really a fermentation factory. There's products being produced in the colon that are called postbiotics. So many are B vitamins. Also a category of nutrients called short-chain fatty acids. The most famous one is butyrate, which is getting a lot of publicity because of its health benefits. So we're feeding ourselves first, and there's very few microbes in the first part of the intestine. And then when it gets to the colon, there are 10 to the 11th power. So if you took a spoonful of microbes from the large intestine, it would be 10 to the 11th power colony forming unit. So a lot of microbes. The small intestine in that same spoonful would be 10 to the second power. So this comes into play a lot with conditions like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, where there's overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine, and there's lots of fermentation taking place in the small intestine where it normally wouldn't take place. So this is really important to understand the different functions of our intestine. It's almost like two different worlds, and both of them have high value to our function. In the large intestine, there's high value for our microbiome. So this is just a breakdown of the kind of normal balance of microbes. We have Firmicutes and Bacteroides are the two major phyla. And so when you're hearing about Firmicutes to Bacteroides ratio, we're looking at the health of the microbiome based on that kind of breakdown. And then there's smaller phyla that are very important, like Proteobacteria, which a lot of our potential pathogens live in that category. And then some of our mucus and our healing bugs that protect the mucus lining is in the Actinobacteria population. So how do we get our microbiome? The thing I'd like to just really highlight about this slide is that from the moment we're born, our microbiome is being influenced. So whether you were born by vaginal birth versus C-section, if you're born by vaginal birth, you're going to get mom's microbiome that is very representative of her gut health. If you're born by C-section, then it's a lot of skin flora that you're actually getting from the skin microbiome. And so that will influence those kind of early imprints, because we're sort of born sterile. And then from the second, our first breath, we're starting to acquire these species. Whether you're breastfed or formula fed will influence the health of the microbiome. Preterm versus full term, did you spend those first few days of your life being kind of passed around to different relatives and picking up their microbes, or were you in the NICU? These are all things that kind of influence those early days. And also there's something called the old friends hypothesis, or used to be called the hygiene hypothesis, which means, are you being raised in an overly sterile environment, or are you exposed to dirt? And these influence the breadth and the diversity in the microbiome. Where you live, what your genetics are, and of course, access to nutritious food. Are you being raised on processed foods or reliant on food stamps, which usually what's being distributed is a lot of carb processed foods. That's going to impact the microbiome. Are you playing with pets, being exposed to farms, or you're being raised with animals? These will all influence the diversity and the breadth of the microbiome, and also medication use. So our microbiome kind of develops as we grow, and it becomes fairly stable by the time we're adults. And then it actually changes as we get older, which is really a subject for another webinar, is the aging microbiome. So I just want to make sure we get through some action steps today. So I'm just going to highlight a few things on this particular slide. First of all, the diversity is really important. If on the right, you can see sort of, if you can picture these like a jelly bean jars, and what we're looking for is a jelly bean jar in the gut microbiome. If we're looking at diversity, we want a lot of different colors. We want a lot of different species represented. We don't want one species dominating. So when we're talking about a diverse gut microbiome, it seems to be that health is more associated with diverse, rich, and even microbiomes. If you have a microbiome that looks like on the right, where there's lots of reds, that usually means that a pathogen has blossomed and is causing disruption and problems. So there's two concepts in the microbiome. One's called eubiosis and the other is called dysbiosis. Eubiosis is essentially a environment where you do have the balanced and rich and diverse microbiome with adequate immune protection, normal inflammation, healthy mucus layers. And then the flip side is something called dysbiosis, where the microbiome's unbalanced and we see inflammation, we see pathogens that are developing, we see permeability issues in the gut. And so when problems arise, it's usually because there's a dysbiotic environment. So the reason why dysbiosis is so critical is because we have this mucus layer. So here on the right is the mucus layer of the colon, and here's the mucus environment of the small intestine. And so when things are working properly, this mucus layer protects the inside world from inflammation when it's in balance. And when it gets dysbiotic, then we see that this mucus lining that is sometimes permeated. So when that takes place, we'll see activation of the immune system. So on the right, you can see that pro-inflammatory molecules are being raised with this microbiome that's actually going through the intestinal lining. And so we'll see inflammation, bacterial species that are activating what are called Th17 cells and TNF alpha cells. And essentially what happens from there is inflammatory problems in the body. So when we mention diabetes and metabolic problems, autoimmune problems, skin problems, this is kind of where it all starts. When we're talking about the gut's relationship with those conditions, is they'll push inflammation into the body. This is a really nice, beautiful picture from the Sonnenberg lab, who does probably the top researcher in the world, maybe, on the microbiome. All these colorful, this is an actual picture of the colon. Those colorful marks at the top, those are all rods and diplococci of bacteria, and you can see them nicely protected by that green area, which is the large intestine, the mucus lining, and that's protecting the blue area, which is the immune system, from being activated and attacking the microbiome, or considering the microbiome as an invader. So this environment is really what we're protecting when it comes down to all the things with diet, lifestyle, stress, is to make sure that this is healthy and stable. So from a human perspective, this is all fascinating, but could you imagine what it's like being one of the trillion bugs that are living in there, just being a single diplococci or rod bacteria? It's quite a different perspective. So Ben, I just want to be respectful of the time with our audience. How much time do we have left today?
Yeah, I would keep going. This is great.
Okay, great.
If people need to check out and head back to work, we'll have it archived, and we'll be sending out an email that will have a link to that. We'll also have it on our YouTube channel. So
okay.
But yeah,
so
you can catch up.
About 5 or 10 more minutes to go with on this, but yeah, I'd love if people would hang with us. So this is something that is my kind of model for a better gut life. And so we have a microbiome friendly diet. We're moving from mucus. So I talked about exercise. Now, exercise in proper volume and in proper amounts is wonderful for that mucus membrane that I was talking about, as far as preserving mucus and building mucus. There's few things out there that are more medicinal than exercise. The other thing that's important in a microbiome is what I say is go vagus. So this is referring to the vagus nerve. So if anybody is into heart rate variability training, you'll know what I'm talking about. The vagus nerve is the connection between the brain and the gut. So the brain and gut balance can influence the health of our microbiome. It can influence the intestinal permeability. It can regulate the immune system. So part of a better gut life is learning how to balance your brain-gut axis through things like heart rate variability training, meditation, stress management techniques. Then we also consider gut-specific supplementation. Again, that's a whole webinar on itself, but things like pre and probiotics are important to think about. Other nutrients like vitamin A and vitamin D, glutamine, that really support the gut lining can be helpful. And then monitoring your microbiome. There's new technology where we can actually once a year or however often is appropriate, take a look and see what's growing inside your body and do some analysis of your gut function, almost like you would like a physical checkup each year. I'm really high on that. Of course, there's not always going to be actionable information, but as we learn more, there will be. And then dietary hygiene is something I'm really passionate about, is slowing down, chewing your food, just really honoring the digestive process, that it should be done in a parasympathetic state. You should be somewhat rested and not rushed when you're eating, and preparing your food so that it's going to be assimilated by your body and that it's something that is actually intentional. So what is a microbiome friendly diet? This is something that I think, a lot of lecturers will say, well, just eat a bunch of fiber. And that's true, but I would like to go a little deeper than that. The core components of a microbiome friendly diet is that it's accessible to the colon. And that's a really key point. So if you're eating lots of processed foods, it's accessible to you. I mean, that small intestine that I was talking about earlier, that those nutrients are largely going to be consumed for you and your internal world. But if you're eating a microbiome friendly diet, you get some, the bugs get some. And by supporting the microbes, as you'll see, it's a very important thing to do, because if we're feeding the microbes, they're also producing B vitamins for us, neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, butyrate and propionate, which are two of the major short-chain fatty acids. Butyrate's a major regulator of inflammation in our body. It's being used in autoimmune diseases to kind of stop inflammation. Propionate is a short-chain fatty acid that's involved with glucose regulation and cholesterol regulation. So if we feed them, they'll take care of us as well. So you want to have foods that will actually reach the colon in some capacity. So those are foods that are not digested by us. So I also want to say that I'm a big believer that any kind of diet or nutritional thing should be sustainable and enjoyable. Extreme eliminations or extreme diets should only be when absolutely necessary, and that making dietary changes should be run through a filter of, will I be able to sustain this? Will it be enjoyable? What impact will this have on my life? So we do know that certain foods will drive certain species. So a high fiber diet will raise up certain species and cause other species to blossom, and like a high fat diet will raise other species. And it's not necessarily, this is not to point out that some foods are good for us and some foods are not, but one thing that is the takeaway is we should be asking the question, which foods feed our colon microbiome in a way that's not pro-inflammatory, but is anti-inflammatory or inflammation balancing. And so that's kind of the end game. And I think people just know generally what foods, if they eat, are going to cause inflammation. I mean, I think that's, people know that, like if you hit McDonald's, you're going to be kicking up the inflammation. If you hit the salad bar, your inflammation is going to be more stable. But we can see that if a patient goes from a vegan diet to a red meat diet, overnight, their microbiome will shift by 25 to 30%. So it's highly adaptable to what we eat. What we feed them will grow certain species. So a Western diet, which is, everybody knows kind of what the Western diet is, associated with low bifido, low lactobacilli, low eubacteria, and increased pro-inflammatory bugs, enterobacteria, which like E. coli is in that family, and Bacteroides. And so we know the Western diet can jack up the inflammation. A Mediterranean diet, which I just saw something today before we got online that it was named the healthiest diet for 2021. And I agree. I think, for the last 20 years, the Mediterranean diet checks all the boxes of longevity, disease prevention, and health. So it does a lot of great things for the gut, raises all these what are considered healthy species, blocks inflammation, reduces diabetes risk, reduces obesity risk. The gluten-free diet I'm just put on here because we should know that certain special diets may have, because of necessity, may reduce certain species. And so anybody put on a special diet should ask the question, how is this impacting my microbiome? And you can supplement around that and help help your body have a more balanced gut microbiome. Protein. So a lot of people, are kind of concerned, should I be eating high protein or low protein? Well, what impact does it have on the gut? Well, we do know that a lot of our microbes in our gut feed on protein, and that's something that a lot of people don't think about. And so protein is very important for the gut. Supplementing with like plant protein actually increases short chain fatty acids. Red meat protein is somewhat associated with inflammatory, bile tolerant bacteria, such as the ones in Bacteroides, Stipes, and Bilophila. That could be a problem in some people. Generally speaking, whey protein and dairy can add some beneficial bugs to us. Fish is the one I'm really interested in because it sort of has a lot of properties that are really healthy for the gut, like polyunsaturated fatty acids, and it's also rich in protein. Let's get further into talking about the carbohydrates. So when I was talking about feeding the microbiome, colonic microbe accessible carbohydrates, which I call CMAX, the term used to be called Big Macs. I like calling them CMAX because these are carbohydrates that actually feed the colon and feed bugs in the colon. They're largely undigested by us and can be also soluble. So they'll go to the colon and feed the microbes after the nutrients from us, for us, has already been taken care of. So they go into the colon almost like as waste. And then the microbiome will use these to grow their own species to make things like butyrate and short chain fatty acids. So these are some examples. The one up top, the glucomannan, is actually cognac noodles. You can find those. It's like another really special kind of noodle. They're called miracle noodles that actually really do help with boosting healthy microbes. I'm a big fan of things that are practical. And so carrots with their peels on them are just a wonderful food for the colon. And it's affordable. Pretty much you can find them year round. My favorite food category of all is polyphenols, and not because coffee is on this picture, but that is a favorite of mine. The polyphenols in our diet are extremely good for the health of our mucus layer in our gut microbiome, protecting against intestinal permeability. They seem to raise up the species that are involved with mucus and gut lining protection. They're anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, so they kind of help groom the balance of the microbiome. And they're just so delicious too. So, it's like, I picked particular ones that I would eat, like on the coumarins, that's cinnamon, the tannins, walnuts, strawberries. All of these are things that you can incorporate into your daily life. Chickpeas, these are all useful in helping grow healthy microbes. They reach the colon and they're colon microbe accessible.
One quick question on the polyphenols, because I have to ask for a friend. Is wine included in that group?
Yeah, so I did put red grapes down here. So that is the wine category. I will point out that alcohol consumption in general can be in excess really harmful on the intestinal lining. I think the old recommendations, of having the occasional glass of red wine is still appropriate, especially from a microbiome standpoint.
They'll be happy. Thank you.
Okay. And then prebiotics. So everybody's heard of prebiotics by now. And so the prebiotics are sort of the actionable end product of oligosaccharides, which are essentially when the starch has been broken down in your body to a very small carbohydrate. These are what are called prebiotics. Why they're called prebiotics is because they grow healthy bacteria. So foods like asparagus have FOS. A food like chickpeas has something called GOS, which is a galacto-oligosaccharide. Raffinose from cabbage, stachyose from peas. These are known to basically be fertilizer for bacteria and healthy bacteria in our gut. So we can eat these foods. We can take them in supplement form if we have to. They'll help us balance our microbiome. That's just something to really consider in a microbiome friendly diet. I've already mentioned this, so I'm just going to move forward a little bit, but the postbiotic effects. So the end game of a microbiome friendly diet is all these things. We get short chain fatty acids, vitamin production. We get anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial properties from our food. If we're not eating fiber or not having any of these foods in our diet, we're basically just putting our colon at more risk for inflammation. And then dietary fat. The best fats for the gut seem to be polyunsaturated fats and monounsaturated fats, and staying away from too much trans fat and saturated fats. Saturated fats are, sort of controversial because there's a lot of really healthy properties in saturated fats as well. So I think it's going to be individualized based on your consumption of saturated fats. Ben and I were talking about how butter that's grass-fed, has lots of really good vitamin K in it, and also has butyrate in it. So, we should be really careful about just making some grand conclusions about all saturated fats. But generally speaking, the deal, like lots of fried trans fats, the donuts, the baked goods, those are pro-inflammatory. They increase white adipose tissue inflammation. They increase inflammation in the intestinal tract, whereas the polyunsaturated fats from olive oils and certain nuts and avocados, they can really help balance inflammation. One thing that is being really talked about in the literature is for a microbiome friendly diet or gut health friendly diet is to watch out for emulsifiers. One of them that's in foods is carrageenan. We see that in a lot of ice cream milk. There's been linked that those can actually trigger an IBD flare, inflammatory bowel disease flare. Looking at the emulsifiers because they can aggravate the gut lining. There's likely going to be more and more warnings around this in the future. Other functional foods. I put this little joke here because if you've ever tried to make home brewed kombucha and compared it to the stuff in the store, it can be a different experience. At least it was for me. But these are just other ways to add healthy bacteria to your diet. Fermented foods like tempeh and krauts, the kombuchas that are sold in stores. Mushrooms in the top category are another form of prebiotic that can help grow healthy microbes. Exercise, I want to go into the real benefits of exercise, since a lot of people that are listening today are into exercise and or working on recovering from injury and getting back to exercise or keeping healthy. It's really the poly pill, and I don't need to tell you this. I mean, if there was one medication that could cover the most ground, is exercise. And so, the doctors tell you to exercise, and some of them have just given up telling people to exercise because everybody knows it. But I don't think people realize that the amount of biochemical pathways that exercise helps. It's like one pill and it helps the brain, the muscles, the heart, the bones, the metabolism. I mean, and when I'm talking about this, it's a combination of cardiovascular exercise and resistance training. So from as far as the gut is concerned, in appropriate amounts, when it's not excessive with good nutrition, it preserves the mucus. It will help us with muscle recovery. It will help, exercise helps with diversity. It decreases inflammation, improves bone production, and lowers inflammation in the body. When it comes to the microbiome, it's been shown that normal, regular exercise increases diversity and decreases permeability of the gut. So when recovering from working out, or if you're having performance recovery issues, I just wanted to point out a few things for you to think about. In the center of this diagram is kind of what I would say pillars. Like, think about, how's my intestinal barrier? How much inflammation am I having? How balanced is my microbiome, and how good is my gut immunity? So we can protect and seal the microbiome, the intestine, with things like glutamine, colostrum, vitamin D, vitamin A. There's different strategies where you can take these pre-exercise or post-exercise, and see if you have better response to your workouts and exercise. Also really being mindful of, am I eating enough plants? Am I stripping down my microbiome by being too high protein and too low carb to get some type of body effect? And in the meantime, I'm feeling sicker after my exercise because my microbiome is not balanced. Also, downregulating your inflammation in safe ways. So what I mean by that is, think about things like omega-3 fatty acids and turmeric and CBD for post-exercise inflammation versus always going to Advil or ibuprofen. You can possibly use those things only if necessary. If you have just mild pain or mild aches after exercise, why not try something that's healthier on your gut lining? And then always support gut immunity. I think one of the things that's a key sign of overtraining is if your heart rate variability is off. So I'm sure Ben and the staff kind of think about that with people, is that, watching if you're overtraining and the stress that your body's building up and the cortisol levels, these can also impact the intestinal lining, and to really monitor overtraining and HRV. There's a lot of devices right now where we can actually monitor our heart rate variability. And this just goes along with this next slide, which is the brain-gut axis. Our brain changes the microbiome if it's stressed. We can actually see diversity changes in studies. Stress increases intestinal permeability. The microbes create neurotransmitters, so we can have certain stressed populations create more dopamine, which can actually cause more anxiety and stress, more norepinephrine. And also the brain can also alter our, the gut can also alter our brain health. So if the gut is imbalanced, we can see sleep disruptions, anxiety, attention issues, and depression. If anybody's really had like a really bad stomach flu, you feel really foggy from all the gut metabolites that can be affecting our brain function. So some takeaways. We're getting towards the end here. I really appreciate you hanging out with me today and sharing this time. You can obviously tell I'm really passionate about this topic. So getting started with fiber, first of all, I just want to give a shout out to a fun book. If you have a little one like I do, making gas passing a kind of normalizing it, I think is really a healthy thing to do with kids. And this book called The Gas We Pass is a very fun book that teaches about gas. So I want to warn you, if this presentation made you sort of say, you know what, I need to get more fiber in my diet, take it slow, because you're not going to like me if you take it fast. It can really create some uncomfortable feelings, and so you have to really kind of just slowly work yourself up. If maybe adding 5 grams a day, if anything, until you're at what's targeted, which is 25 to 30 grams a day, should be really what we're all sitting at. And I've put some safe fibers that if you're dipping your toes in the water, you can look at these, this list here, and perhaps pick a few items that you think you could tolerate. There are supplements. One of the best ones out there for fiber supplementation is called partially hydrogenated guar gum, sun fiber. It's tolerable. It doesn't cause the kind of normal fiber supplementation gas, usually speaking. Also, digestive enzymes are sometimes good to have on board if you're just getting started with adding more fiber in your diet. I'll leave you with a couple things here. If this sort of excited you to take your gut more seriously, I would start with knowledge and awareness. You can do a questionnaire to see how your gut health is. On my website, if you go to the digestive health portion, there's a questionnaire called the Digestive Wellness Questionnaire. And if you fill it out, I will answer you personally and give you kind of just an overview of my impressions of your gut health. And just go and fill that out. That's fine with me. I'll get back to you, within 48 hours on a business day. And then you can also do gut health testing. There's a lot of good ones out there. There's a lot of not so good ones. And some of the ones that I like is the Gut Zoomer by Vibrant Wellness. I like GI Map, Diagnostic Health Solutions. I like Longevity. Any company that's testing your gut and selling you a pill based on your results, I would really watch out for. I'm really big on people who are doing analysis of your gut microbiome with no kind of supplement that has to go with your results. So just kind of flag for that. And that's just kind of my opinion. Remember, you're eating for 3,000,000,001. So you're not just eating for yourself, you're eating for the 3 billion species that are living inside your gut. Continue to move for your mucosa and mind your brain-gut axis. And then just a few other things for repair. I've already mentioned these. If you are someone who's a vegan athlete, I would encourage you to check out the work by Thrive with Brendan Brazier. For athletes, it really resonates because a lot of vegan diets aren't built for performance, and this one really is. And if you learn from Brendan, I think you'll feel like you can be a vegetarian and be a high performance athlete. And I just want to thank you for attending. This sign is just kind of a joke, but really I'm in this whole profession for helping people. This is, and learning and adding clarity. And I hope that's something that you benefited from attending today. Here's ways to reach me. You can send me an email. I'll be happy to respond. There's my podcast. I do a lot on Instagram. That's my kind of main social media outlet. I post a lot of information on gut health and metabolism, brain health. And so please follow me there.
Yeah,
and
can you keep that slide? Yeah, can you keep that slide up? That's great. I think like so many of us that have dogs or kids you're walking, a podcast can be kind of a nice thing to listen to. And I think the one more, the one thing podcast, you've had some great guests, Jason Howlerlach and Andrea Hardy, and a good group, including one of our last speakers on our webinars, Dr. Jeff LeCoven as well. So it's a good group there. And then your blog is very rich in content as well. So
Thank you.
That's good inspiration for us too, to continue to improve our blog. So take a look at his website. And then just as a side note too, currently, if you're afraid to go in or have immunocompromised situations or that sort of thing, Dr. Rinde does have telehealth options, which is kind of the thing to do now. But I think, it's been a perfect complement just in general to your practice, because some of these things are intimidating and it gives you another access point for information. I have a couple of questions. Couple questions came in before the webinar, and then a couple came in during, and so we'll see if we can work through if you're okay on time, or
Absolutely.
If you have a few minutes. If people, again, you won't offend us if you check out, again, all this will be available on the archive. But I guess it was from a physical therapist, and that was, what is the number one advice you might give to PTs either working with a naturopath, or what are the things that you like to see from a physical therapist standpoint?
I just think that, the relationship I enjoy is, just being kept in the loop as far as what's going on, the communication of the plan. we really rely on your expertise. And so just understanding kind of the plan and the outcomes. And I think one of the things Lake Washington Physical Therapy does that's really nice is sending over like the treatment plan and the outline of what's going to, kind of roll out for the next several weeks. So I think that's great. The other thing I think would be really nice is just to talk about inflammation together, and talk about response to treatment, because pain is such a issue, and we're trying to move away from opioids as a medical community. And what other options can we provide for the patient so that between visits and between their treatments, they're getting balanced inflammatory response. So I would like to see more of that. That I think that could add to the outcomes.
Absolutely. I guess for you personally, what's your favorite type of patient to see?
I like people who just really are interested in learning, and they're actively involved with the process. Like they want to learn this stuff. They want to learn it for themselves. They want to learn it for their family members. They want to understand how their body works. And at the end of the day, if they don't need me, I've done my job.
That's that. My father used to laugh about that. He's like, "You're the one job where you're just trying to get rid of your customers as soon as they come in." Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
that's the plan.
yeah, it's so true. I mean, like that's the metric, is like if you've taught and provided knowledge and empowerment and education, and people are able to live a healthy lifestyle and diet and nutrition and sleep and all those things, and they're doing it, they usually just kind of pop in for their annual visit and
Yeah.
just kind of keep on top of things.
Yeah, that's a subtle reminder for annual visits, right? I guess what are hack might be kind of the wrong word. I'm not trying to sound like Tim Ferriss here, but what's your favorite kind of thing that you might do with runners other than kind of volume and strength training? Is there things you'd like to see dietary wise, sleep wise? Um, I mean, everything in this lecture so far kind of touched a little bit on it, but is there things like you could take away if you're the elevator spiel to a runner?
Yeah, I mean, I think with runners, I would be thinking about getting away from the mindset of like post exercise protein drinks and things like that to pre exercise inflammation management. So that's a lot of words in one, but I really think, a runner needs to be thinking about like things like taking glutamine before they run, either pre and post, or just pre, to help their digestive tract have a little bit more inflammation control. So one of the things I didn't get to talk about in one of my slides that I had to leave out is all the factors that cause intestinal permeability. And one of them is hypoperfusion. So this is basically a fancy way of saying low blood flow. So when we're exercising, the gut's not getting much blood flow. So the harder you're pushing it, the less blood flow is going to the intestine, and the intestine is more vulnerable for pH changes and for inflammation. And so pre-treating with glutamine is one of my favorite sort of, I would say, performance suggestions is to, in a powdered form. I'm not going to give specific advice, but people can reach out to me. But that's something to look into, is taking glutamine pre and post. The other thing is, I think that the volume load management is really becoming, obviously it's pretty big in the NBA. I mean, it's like almost made fun of, but like overtraining, do you really need to do that many miles when you're training for a race? Like, can you, I think there's a lot of influence right now of like keeping the volume down. And I think that's really important. If you're a runner and you're doing this kind of performance training and you haven't been tracking your heart rate variability, that is really critical, because by tracking heart rate variability, which you can get like it's on iWatches. I've seen them, people get the Aura ring to track heart rate variability. It will really tell you if you're overtraining, because your nervous system starts to kick off different neurotransmitters, and you become more sympathetic dominant, and that can be a guide for you. So I like to have all my performance athletes to get dialed into heart rate variability training.
No, I think that's a good point too. We like, at least for me, primarily my patient source is runners, and I think that you see people doing a recovery run. I'm really encouraging people to not do recovery runs and to do recovery. And
Yeah.
mileage just for the sake of mileage, which I typically call dirty miles, is just mileage to make you feel good on your Garmin or your training peaks, and it's not necessarily leading to healthy performance and longevity too. Whether it's a high school runner that's trying to, it's an outstanding freshman, or it's someone who's 50 years old training for an ultra. Like you have to, yeah, you do need some sort of base. I understand that, but you also, I mean, you have to have that recovery and sleep, and
Yeah.
uh, the stress
Yeah.
reaction doesn't help you meet your goals.
Yeah. I'd like to add to that is like, I once did some rotations at Virginia Mason with a physiatrist, and at the time I was only in my 30s, and he's about the age I am now, and he was telling me that it's all about cartilage management, and if we're wearing down our cartilage, the running's not going to take place for the long run. So to really be mindful of like, how are you running through pain? Are your joints feeling good? So there's a lot of ways to do that, and load management, the proper stretching and mobility that you guys teach. From a nutrition standpoint, being on an anti-inflammatory diet will help preserve cartilage. And there's nutrients now, like things like collagen and other things you can add to help kind of preserve cartilage, because at the end of the day, if your knees aren't feeling well and your hips aren't feeling well, it's really hard to run.
Absolutely. And it's not just mind over matter, which
Yeah.
a question that we get quite often, or that we see referred even, is that an explosion of vitamin D added to the diet. Or do you have any tips on that? I know we talked a little bit about this beforehand, but I think for so many folks, this would be a great tip on the ability to metabolize and absorb. What are kind of some of the tricks you have there?
Yeah, so vitamin D is usually supplemented by itself, in a vitamin D3 form, and vitamin D is widely known as for its health benefits. But one of the things that people can be frustrated with is if they don't have good gut health, then their vitamin D levels might not go up. So their absorption of it will be not transported. Now, it's a fat soluble vitamin, so it's meant to be taken with food. So that's one really important thing to know. But we've learned over the years that taking it with vitamin K2 increases its bioavailability. So if you're looking for vitamin D supplements, you would want to make sure it has vitamin K2 in combination, especially if you're having nutrient absorption issues. The majority of people are just fine with taking vitamin D on its own, but if your vitamin D status has not gone up, you might look at combining it with K2.
Excellent. Let's see, one last one. Let's see. Here's one. Okay, so this is an interesting one too, and you might or might not be able to answer on this, but yeah, it was someone who sent in a message in, and that was IVF versus traditional conception. Are there any early information on microbiome or health related situations there?
Yeah, so as of a year or so ago, I would say there's absolutely no difference between um, someone who's conceived through an IVF process versus through standard intercourse or what have you. What we're learning, starting to see signs in the research that there is some transfer of the microbiome in utero, but I think that all takes place after fertilization. So at this point, we don't know of any kind of genetic imprint or benefit of one versus the other. We're just learning that some microbiome transfer can happen in utero, though.
Okay. So as long as we still have in utero,
yeah, that's
that's
the key.
That's the future. Yes, sci-fi. And I might ask this just for myself. So as an adopted parent, what are some of the things that you would do or not do to try to improve microbiome, considering you have you may not have the mother's milk, you may not have the biological gene pool available. Um,
Yeah, I mean, and I think about this all the time, when I'm watching my son eat. The poor guy, he's, I'm what's going through my head is like, how's this food influencing his microbiome? And kids are kids, and they're attracted to carby foods that are processed and taste good. But I would say the biggest thing is getting them around lots of people, getting them to play in the dirt, getting them to have pets and animals, and then making vegetables and polyphenols a regular part of their diet, keeping them away from antibiotics only if necessary. A lot of parents, myself included, is when your child's ill, you really just want that illness to end. And so there's like a jump to, we'll just give him an antibiotic, let's make sure he doesn't get really sick.
Right.
So really, like, questioning that and being courageous about the question, is this something that needs an antibiotic, or is this something that will be self-resolving? Talking to your doctor about that question, and thinking about other nutrients and immune support. So really looking at that microbiome, I read somewhere where the majority of people who are not mindful will go through their life and have 30 to 100 courses of antibiotics.
Wow.
And so that can leave a lasting impact on the microbiome.
Well, I think too, when you talk to parents, or even you look at Google reviews, and you go to a physician, and people leave without a prescription, they feel the appointment was not worthwhile. And in some cases, and maybe it was a very short appointment, but other times information is not gleaned as valuable at times as well.
Yeah.
One final question. This is kind of like my one COVID question that was sent in here, and that is outside COVID. So if we can remember a time, hand sanitizer, is it making us safer or weaker, generally speaking?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some, ability to say that if it's something that's on a regular, ongoing basis, that essentially it's leading to less diversity in your skin microbiome. Now, the skin microbiome is really important. I would say that it's a benefit versus risk scenario. If you can get by with just using soap, then I would encourage that for a long-term use. But there are certain situations like medical environments and procedures, and you're dealing with patients that using hand sanitizers is necessary. But I'm more concerned about its impact on the skin microbiome and kind of the flora in our skin versus something dramatically internal, like with our metabolism or our deeper immune system. Still important to think about.
Yeah. No. Awesome. Well, hey, I've got 4 pages of notes, so that's a good size of a great amount of information. So I really appreciate doing this. And again, follow Sound Integrative on Instagram, on the social channels, and Dr. Rinde is always very accessible, which is great as a provider, but also for a patient. If you have a question, don't hesitate to email or contact his office. And he's just great at following up on items, and takes a lot of time with patients too. So that's always really rewarding, and kind of the model that we've tried to follow as well. So thanks so much for the time, and let's connect again soon. You got about 6 more webinars built into this almost.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I would love to, and I'm likely going to put up a post webinar little clip on my website about the factors of intestinal permeability, because I think that's a good kind of like 2.0 of this presentation, is to learn about all the different things that can influence your intestinal lining.
Great. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for coming, and we'll talk again soon. Actually, one quick note is that next month we have Dr. Vernice from Swedish, who's going to be talking about SI joint injuries And then the next month we have Dr. Boone at ProLiance. And then after that, we have Dr. Mickelson, who will be talking about shoulder and knee injury. So thanks for everybody following us and participating. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Ben.
Take care.